We are thrilled to have you with us for the 5th episode of TAP Talk. Our podcast today discusses the importance of financial preparedness. When it comes to managing your finances, seeking advice from a financial counselor can be incredibly helpful when transitioning to the civilian sector. Our TAP financial counselors can help assist you with managing your finances, including budgeting and investing. Our guest for today's podcast is Josiah Harp. Josiah is a financial expert with a passion for helping soldiers prepare for their future. As a financial counselor for TAP, he can share his expertise and help our community achieve their financial goals. It is my pleasure to introduce Walter Hurd, Director of the Transition Assistance Program, and Josiah Harp.
Hello, everybody. I am so excited to see you again and really appreciate the opportunity. This is podcast number 5 for us here. Everyone gets better. We've had the Veterans Administration. We've had our partners pays. We've had my Sergeant Major here in the TAP office, and we've had a great counselor, one of many at Fort Liberty. Today, we're going to talk about financial counseling. But first, let me kind of set the stage for you just in review. So about 100,000 soldiers a year take off their uniform and transition back into the civilian society from which we all came. Some of them came 3 years ago, some of them 30 years ago, some of them active, some guard, some reserve, some ETSing, some retiring, a whole lot of scenarios. And each of them goes through a series of counseling gates in the Army's Transition Assistance Program. I'm excited to be the director of that program, and as such, we have TAP centers, as you probably know, all over at basically every Army installation. And then the Army, and only the U.S. Army, has a virtual TAP center 24/7 that gives you the same capabilities and counseling and help that you get at a brick and mortar center. So we're really excited today. We've got one of those counselors, Josiah Harp, works coincidentally, physically here at Fort Knox, Kentucky, but he works in the virtual center, so he works in that virtual universe and gives financial counseling to soldiers. So, Josiah, I really appreciate you being here. I've got about 20 questions for you because this is such an important topic, but I appreciate you being here, and I'll give you a chance just to say hello and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Mr. Hurd, it's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, exactly. I'm a financial counselor for the TAP program at the Virtual Center. And I've assisted the Virtual Center along with many other sites across the world, actually, as an FTST, a Forward Transition Support Team. That's what is part of my title, and I've supported sites in Korea, Germany, and actually physically in Fort Knox. So the brick and mortar in Fort Knox, as well as the virtual center at Fort Knox.
That's great. I've got a bunch of financial questions for you about that aspect, but I want to talk to you a little bit about the virtual center and have you kind of tell me what that means. So as the name implies, obviously the virtual center is on the internet in the virtual world. And unlike the brick and mortar centers on an installation that have duty hours basically from kind of 7:30 to 4 or something like that. The virtual center, I think, is open 24/7, right? And all day, every day. Tell me a little bit about what's the advantage of that?
Yeah, so we are a 24/7 operation. We're only closed on 3 holidays, but other than that, it's 24/7. So we have transition counselors and financial counselors rotating in and out all day. We have first, second, third shift. And the advantage of having a virtual center, despite what some people may think, we actually do have a physical location at the HRC building in Fort Knox. So we're all not working from home. We're actually working at a physical building. But the advantage is we assist service members who maybe don't have access to a TAP site at their location, or a TAP site's 50 or more miles away. And we can also assist service members on a short suspense. So if they are getting med boarded or chaptered, then they can hit up the virtual center and we can take care of the whole TAP program for them, get them all the resources they need.
So let me get this straight. Let's say I'm a soldier and I'm teaching ROTC in University of South Dakota, and there's no Army installation around there, or maybe recruiting command or any one of 100 other dispersed positions. Or if I'm at Fort Liberty, but it's midnight on Saturday night, and that's when my spouse and I want to talk TAP and talk about resumes and budgets and all that stuff. So we can call the virtual center from South Dakota University or at midnight in North Carolina. And you guys, now, do you have the whole gambit of TAP, everything from precept to capstone and everything in between?
Yes, we do. We have transition counselors as well as financial counselors. So, you get on the phone, you'll call in, and the next person in queue will pick up the phone, and it'll be a transition counselor, and they can actually get you started in the process. And they'll schedule you for classes, get all your deliverables taken care of. Of course, it's a longer process, but, as they'll be the representative for you. And then financial counselors as well. We have them there that teach the class and assist with all the financial spending plan, all the aspects of that part of the program as well.
So let's kind of focus on that. So if you're one of those soldiers and you're out off of an installation, which of course the vast majority of America is, not next to an installation, or if it's midnight on Saturday night and that's when you want to get going and you want to talk about your financial plan. So they called, and literally, Josiah, you might be the one on the phone, and then in the virtual online world. And a couple of questions: why is that really important? Frankly, what if they're kind of good to go? They've got some money, and they're basically good to go, or so they think. Why is it important to really talk about a financial strategy? And then number two, kind of talk us through what that looks like.
Yeah. So. Super important to be talking financial strategy, especially with the TAP program. And that's kind of how we structure things as financial counselors. Will take the class, and there's a thing called a spend plan, which is, depending on your self-assessed tier, is if you have to fill one out. But I highly, highly encourage everyone, no matter the tier, to fill out a spend plan. It doesn't matter if you already know everything you can about finances or you're just a beginner and just learning your first, financial aspects. But the spend plan definitely sets the stage. We can definitely get into what is comprised in the spend plan, but super awesome resource to kind of project before transition and then after transition where you stand financially.
So let me kind of drive that home and make sure I heard what you said. So of course, we've got 100,000 soldiers, and they're the whole gamut, right? From young to old, you name it, representing America's society. So some of those may be in dire straits financially. Some of those may be fat and happy financially for whatever reason. But I think what you just said is that it's important for everybody to have that plan. That kind of makes sense because you have that plan, maybe you spend a lot, maybe you spend a little, but it's always easier to spend more than you have, right? That's the bad thing. So kind of talk us through that. What's different in a civilian financial plan than a financial plan in uniform? I know when you're in uniform, of course, you get some money for housing and location and maybe a mess hall and some of that stuff. So what are some of the differences between civilian things you have to buy and things in uniform you might have to buy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and that's kind of what our spend plan actually highlights. So we have a plethora of sections that you fill out, but in the end, we're actually comparing your financial well-being as a service member versus as a civilian, and it definitely highlights all the differences as a civilian. And that's kind of the point, as a civilian, your tax bracket will look very different, and we explain the reasons why that is in the financial class, as well as expenses. A big expense that some service members might not think about is healthcare, and I love to talk about health insurance and how expensive it can be. And of course, we go into the nuances of health insurance and healthcare during the financial planning for transition class. But those are just two things I like to highlight.
That's a great one. I just want to tell you a quick personal vignette about that. When I retired, I'd never really thought about healthcare because Uncle Sam has always taken care of my healthcare and surgeries and my wife having babies and all that kind of stuff was basically free. And then on retirement day, I had to do this thing called insurance premium, right? And every month I had to pay money for healthcare, something I had gotten as part of my benefit package my whole life. So that's a big one. And then I know things like housing and depending, you may eat in the mess hall or you may not. All that stuff really adds up, though, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly.
So the key step to what you said kind of got started is to do that spend plan, just to write it on a piece of paper. Here's how much health insurance is going to cost. Here's how much groceries are going to cost. Here's how much my rent's going to cost, and then see what you need to make, right?
Yeah, exactly. And our spend plan with the TAP program, it's actually an Excel document. So when you fill out specific sections of this document, it can pre-fill sections. So if you add up all your income, all your taxes, it does all the math for you. You put in your expenses before and after, and it will, take your income, subtract your expenses, and give you your net income. And of course, we go over what gross versus net income and how taxes affect, and then so many other things like debt, assets, how those affect your financial plan as well.
I'm going to pass on some advice I got in TAP roughly 100 years ago, but it really adds up. And that is the benefits package, the inclusive benefits package of perhaps your next employer is more than just salary, because there's all this other stuff that's in addition to salary, like healthcare and stipends for all kinds of stuff. That in uniform, your benefits cap package is much more than salary. So I think the thing for soldiers, and you're the expert, Josiah, is that when they're doing that financial plan, they need to incorporate all that into an ultimate benefits package. Maybe you get a smaller salary, but more healthcare. Some companies have healthcare and childcare, or the list is endless of what you could get. So that's a good thing to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think not all benefits are created equal as well. And I like to, talk about that during the class. Health insurance being a huge one. I've seen health insurance be as small as $200 a month, depending on your employer or your situation, as high as $2,000 a month for a family. So it ranges. So when people are looking at jobs, health insurance is a huge thing to look at for that. And I like to definitely drive that home.
So do you all cover some different advantage tax issues and kind of what's taxable and what's not taxable, and how a potential employee, and by the way, the vast majority of our 100,000 soldiers plan to eventually transition and get a job, work for somebody. That's what most of us do. Some are entrepreneurs, some are full-time students who eventually work for somebody. But even entrepreneurs, of course, have to go through the same spend plan, maybe even more complicated because they've got their employees to figure out. So to talk about. So do you work the tax angle into any of these discussions, Josiah?
Yes. So during our income section of the spend plan and the financial planning for a transition class, we go heavy into taxes. And I like to make a joke during the spend plan. There's a slide that initially starts about taxes, and then another slide, and then another slide, and then another slide. I'm like, because I know everyone likes talking about taxes, we're going to explain this even more. And taxes is a huge thing, right? Like you mentioned earlier, BAH and BAS. This is the first thing we drive home is those are non-taxable allowances. And we actually go over how that affects your income as a service member, and then what that looks like as a civilian, right? So we're not getting BAH and BAS anymore. And even if you were, you'd be taxed on it. And even taking it a step further in the BAH and BAS, while you're in the military, anything that's labeled allowance on your LES, that will be non-taxable. So especially for our service members overseas, they might have costs of living allowance or a family separation allowance. All those allowances are not taxed as well. So as a civilian, if you were to make that income, it's all going to be taxed. So it will be taxed significantly. And we kind of illustrate that during the class. We give them visuals, and we definitely nail that point on the head. So,
well, that's a huge point, and I can't drive that home enough as you have. So let me just see if I can come up with some numbers. I'll just make up some numbers, but let's say you make X amount of dollars in uniform when you add up all the benefits and the housing and everything, and then a civilian job with the same X amount of salary. In fact, that's considerably less money in your pocket because you get taxed on all that stuff instead of just some of it. And of course, your location has a huge impact on how much money you walk away in your pocket. X amount in San Francisco and X amount in Lower Alabama are night and day, right? So that's important. Now, I think something like the majority of our soldiers, and I'll have to tell you that every soldier, from a policy perspective and even more importantly from a logical perspective, needs to sit down and talk about their spend plan with an expert and just kind of write it on paper. Paper's cheap. So write it on paper and talk to somebody smart like Josiah and see what makes sense. But everybody doesn't. I think about 3/4, give or take, of the people, for whatever reason, they just don't. And they pay for it literally in the long run. But do you think there's Josiah, one maybe type of person that does or does not need a spend plan more than another type?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some people are more reluctant to fill out the spend plan than others. Some people think that I'm fine financially. I don't want you to have my financial information, whatever their excuse is. But I don't think there's anybody that doesn't have to fill out the spend plan. Of course, you have your tiers, people who are required to, but there's no fault in filling out the spend plan. You won't lose out on anything. The only thing you're doing is helping yourself and your family, even if you think you will be fine financially. Actually sitting down, writing all the numbers out, and figuring out where you stand, even if it's good or bad, it doesn't matter. But finding out where you stand, and if you need to make any changes, right? Because that's a huge point to the spend plan too. Are you spending too much in a certain area? Is your income not enough to cover your daily living expenses? All these things we look at, and I think it's for everybody. There isn't really anybody that shouldn't be filling out the spend plan.
So let me address something, and I hear this frequently, unfortunately, and that is some soldiers in the minority that don't want to share any of this stuff and want to use it. They'll say, "Hey, that's not the Army's business to know how much I'm going to have in my mortgage payment and car payment." Do you keep track of that? I mean, is anybody writing down how much Private Jones has got for a house payment? And we keep it in like a secret record book or something?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we do get that question probably more than you think. I always make it a point in my class to address that. When you're sending in these spend plans, the only people who are reviewing them are financial counselors and yourself, the person filling out the spend plan. And after that, it's deleted. It's not sent to any commanders. It's not saved into any Army databases or anything like that. It's just deleted. So, and I like to preface that by saying the spending plan is for you and you only. I don't care if you're making a lot of money, you have a huge surplus at the end of the month or at the end of the year. It doesn't matter if you're in the hole, but we want you to see that, right? The spend plan is for you and your family, of course. But it doesn't get saved anywhere or anything like that.
Just wanted to make sure there wasn't some Big Brother database that had Private Jones's mortgage payment.
Yeah.
And I didn't think so, but talking about who needs to fill this out, I read something recently that some professional athletes, and I won't name the sport, but it's a big sport, and I think their average league salary, their minimum league salary, is something like $300,000 a year. A lot of money. Yet the vast majority of them are living paycheck to paycheck, which is mind-boggling because that's a ton of money. Mm-hmm. So what that means is they don't have a basic spend plan that says, I make this much, I'm only going to spend this much. And they just kind of go crazy. So whether it's 300,000 or 30,000 or 10,000, a plan is always good. And one reason, and tell me if I'm on track here, Josiah, one of the reasons why it's important to know what your required spending is, your housing, your car, your cell phone, all the stuff you pretty much have to have. And then add it up at the end of the month, because that helps you focus on particular types of jobs and job salaries. So if I need to make Y amount of money every month just to pay the bills, I need to be applying to jobs that pay Y amount of money, right? And otherwise, you just don't know that. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you said that perfectly. Everyone does have a baseline of kind of their standard of living. So there's a couple of ways you can go about looking at standard of living and how much you need to make, right? If you know your standard of living, right, we're writing down all of our expenses, our projected expenses, writing down all of our debts, how much savings do we have? So it will tell you, the numbers don't lie. It tells you how much you need to make in the civilian world in your projected income in order to maintain that current standard of living. So it's either one, you make just enough, right, to hit even. Obviously, we hope it would be more so you can put some of the savings and investments. But another way you can look at it is if you can't make up that income, maybe you can spend less, right? So there's two different aspects we can attack. We can attack our income or our spending, right? So maybe you're spending an excess amount on dining out, or maybe you're spending an excess amount on rent or your mortgage or what have you, whatever it is, a car payment. There's two different ways you can kind of attack getting ahead, right? So it's make more, spend less, or decrease your debt, right? That's another one.
I'm gonna give, this is frightening. I'm gonna give you some financial advice that somebody gave me 50 years ago, and it's brilliant. It's horrible grammar, and I apologize to all the English teachers out there, but it made a lot of sense, as a young high school kid financially, and that is, don't spend what you ain't got. And whether you got 300,000 a year or 10,000 a year, just spend less than that, and you'll eventually be okay. It breaks my heart to see young soldiers with, brand new, really expensive cars, because I know that they're kind of upside down on that. So this spend plan. So that's kind of my next question. When in the transition process, or for that matter, in the life process, the military life cycle, when's it a good time to really talk about the transition, the spend plan, and put it on paper and see what you have and see what you need? What's the timing on that?
Yeah. So as soon as possible, right? We have the guidelines say if you're ETSing, you can start the TAP program 18 months before you ETS. If you're retiring, it's 24 months. So I highly encourage every service member that's transitioning out of the military is to start as soon as you can. And when you start, like, when should you start talking about these things? Right away, right when you get in contact with that transition counselor, you should be taking these classes, filling out these deliverables, because the earlier you start, right, the more beneficial it will be in the long run, right? If you sit down with your spouse, let's say, to fill out the spend plan a year and a half in advance before you transition out, then you can start tackling some of the things you see in your spend plan. Maybe you see your family has too much debt, too much credit card debt, maybe a couple car loans that are looking kind of weird, or whatever it is. Sitting down with your spouse, I think, is super important if you have a spouse, so you all can get on the same page. But doing that as early as possible is highly, highly encouraged.
Okay, so for the record, I think I just heard, and I want everybody to listen to this and write it down. I think what you just said, that the actual expert on the show here today, Josiah Harp, just said that it's impossible to start your spend plan and your financial plan too early. Is that a safe assessment of what you just told us?
It is. You very much want to start it as early as possible.
Okay. So I tell people that TAP is like physical training. You can't start it too early. If you do a bunch of extra push-ups 2 years out, it's all good. Same thing with your financial plan. Do a little bit of homework 2 years out, 10 years out, 20 years out. It's all good to come up with that plan. You mentioned a couple of times spouses. Obviously, spouses have a huge impact on all aspects of life. You may or may not have one when you transition. You might get one later. Maybe you have one now, but you're not going to have one later. I don't know. But it certainly has an impact on all things, to include financial things. So can spouses come to this, and do they? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, spouses are able to come. I highly encourage spouses to take part in the classes, have an active role in your service member's transition, right? Because it's not only your service member transitioning, but it's the family, right? And I think sometimes service members don't think about that. I have had spouses come to my in-person classes when I taught at the Fort Knox brick and mortar, and I loved seeing spouses. I'd have a show of hands, who's spouse here, and ask those general questions. And I could always tell the couples that were there, they took the class more serious. They're in the back taking notes, filling out the spend plan while we're going through the class. And you can definitely tell whenever a service member includes their spouse, the whole process is taken a lot more seriously. They're getting a lot more out of the program, especially with the financial aspect, the spend plan and what have you.
Yeah, that's probably true in a lot of things, by the way. If the spouses are involved with each other, it just goes better. So you talked about filling out your spend plan in class. So that implies when you come to your class, virtual center, brick and mortar, wherever, come to that class, it's good to have some of your records with you, right? I mean, your bills and stuff. What kind of things do they need to bring? Does it need to be a piece of, a paper, a bill you get in the mail, or what do you think?
Yeah. So it is important to have some financial documents before you come to the class to take full advantage of the class. And when I send out my emails, hey, you're taking the class this day, I'll tell them, bring things like your LES, bank statements, mortgage statements, credit card statements. A lot of this stuff is online nowadays, so you can pull it up via the internet, but having, the login information, the what websites to go to find out your financial information. Yeah. Super important to get accurate numbers on your current income and expenses, things like that. So that's why we encourage you to bring your financial documents.
So here's the question. What if somebody forgets their electric bill and their phone bill or something? Can they come back to you, a week later or something? Hey, I've got it now. I think I've fleshed it out, so that you can kind of coach them, or is it a one-time, no, if you don't have it today, hit the road?
Yeah. That's a good question. So if you don't remember maybe your login information, you don't know kind of what you're paying and electricity bill, water bill, what have you, you can hold off on the spend plan. You don't have to fill it out during class. I'm just always under the adage that I wasn't a fan of homework when I was in school, so I won't make our service members have homework if they don't want. But I will have some service members specifically not fill it out in class because maybe their spouse didn't come. They're like, oh, I didn't realize my spouse could come. So I want to sit down with my spouse and we want to, pull up some of these bills we have, and I will turn it into you later. We can talk about it or talk it over later if they need to. And I highly encourage that as well. If you could get the most accurate numbers, whether it's during class or after class, I think accuracy is the key here.
Well, I tell you what, this is important stuff that impacts everybody. 100%, young, old, rich, poor, good, bad, or ugly. Everybody needs that financial plan. And I think just to kind of highlight some of the main points you just heard, and then I'll ask you for some closing comments, Josiah. I think we talked about spouses. Spouses come. This is important. Soldiers, bring your spouse. This is really important. I think we talked about bringing the data with you to class, so you can just get it done right there. You got an expert standing right in front of you. Let's just get it done. But if you want to get some kind of one-on-one time later, that's okay. You can do that. Make an appointment next Tuesday and bring all your stuff and just help me do it. That's all good. And then, of course, as with the rest of the TAP, it's impossible to start too early. You just can't. I mean, think about it in the extreme. If a 5-year-old kid starts with a spend plan, they're going to be pretty squared away by the time they're an adult. They will have figured out the whole don't spend what you ain't got mindset. And I think we're going to end the day fairly well. And also you talked about there are some major differences between benefits in uniform and benefits out of uniform. Housing, healthcare, food, cost of living, deployment. All those things don't exist on the outside in most cases. If they do, I guess they're taxed. So this is really important. We could talk hours on this, and I hope soldiers think for hours on this, because this will impact and it's not just how much money you have, but it's because that really impacts so many other things. Your ability to manage whatever money you have impacts your physical health, your mental health, your stress, your quality of life. If you're always stressed and you're always bouncing checks and all this stuff, then it's going to be painful. So this is really, it doesn't solve all problems, but it sets you up for success for a lot of additional challenges that we all face, by the way, every single one, young or old. So I appreciate that. Josiah, you're a smart guy, and you've been doing this with, heck, thousands of soldiers. What's the one thing? I mean, what's like the one thing you want them to write on a piece of paper and put on their refrigerator and remember about this whole financial and spend plan concept?
One thing I would say is, at least in terms for the TAP program, is, getting that spend plan filled out as accurately as possible. I think even making some silly mistakes on the spend plan, they can mess up how the spend plan looks after you fill it out. So I think, of course, sitting down with your spouse if you have a spouse, but making sure that spending plan is filled out as accurate as you can, because in the end, the spend plan is for you and only you. And I think it gives so much great financial information about yourself to where no one can't be financially successful if they fill out the spend plan and realize where they need to make changes. But that's where I'd stand.
Well, I think he just summed it up. Nobody can't be financially successful. You got to plan, you got to think about it, you got to work on it, but it's not impossible. And with the expertise, Josiah, that you bring and your peers bring, and soldiers, if they invest the time and energy, they can be very successful. So that is awesome. Listen, our time's about up. I really appreciate your time today, Josiah. We're increasing every month. I think we're around 1,500, 2,000 people see these, and they're on YouTube. So please tell your friends, and we can keep watching this stuff, because it's just as true today as it's going to be in 6 months. It's just as true for the soldiers who ETS tomorrow as it will be for the soldiers who ETS in a year or two, certainly with this topic and the others as well. So I encourage everybody listening to tell your friends about it. Watch it again, because there's some good stuff that you might not have caught the first time you saw it. I know I go back and watch it and learn a lot every time. And Josiah, boy, how many good lessons you gave everybody today. Go early. Success is possible. Think about it. Bring your family. Put your skin in the game, because this is your game. It's not our game. This is your game. So run with it. Thank you all so much. It's almost Christmas time, so I hope everybody has a great Christmas and appreciate your service. Each of you, counselors, soldiers, leaders, and our nation appreciates it. And Merry Christmas, and God bless each one of you. Thank you.
Proper financial planning is crucial for a successful transition from active duty. Budgeting, saving, and retirement planning can alleviate stress and set you up for success. Thank you for joining us today. Please stay tuned for our next podcast in January. In conclusion, we highly encourage you to attend TAP early and often to help you be all you can be.